Hi everyone. Today we're looking at the rhetorical choices that Joanna McKay makes in her argument, Organ Sales Will Save Lives. One thing I really like about this reading is that the notes in the margins provided by our textbook are really helpful. They guide you through all of the key ingredients of a good argument, though in a rhetorical analysis you still have to decide how well you think those ingredients are actually working. So let's take a look at how Joanna McKay structures her argument and how we might approach a rhetorical analysis of it. On page 157, you see that the Norton textbook highlights in yellow at the side on the right side that there is a clear and arguable position, the thesis statement. It's very direct. Governments should not ban the sale of human organs, they should regulate it. Now we know exactly what McKay is going to make a case for and try to persuade us to agree with: the legal sale of organs regulated by the government. That's her argument. So now we want to look at her whole introduction, studying the rhetorical choices that she makes. What is the tone of her introduction? So she says there are thousands of people dying to buy a kidney and thousands of people dying to sell a kidney. It seems a match made in heaven. So why are we standing in the way? Government should not ban the sale of human organs. They should regulate it. Lives should not be wasted. They should be saved. All right, so there's definitely some pathos appeal in here. Look at the evocative word choices. Dying is repeated to emphasize the importance of the issue, the gravity of the situation. The language is also somewhat casual, meant to make you feel involved in a real conversation about something McKay wants you to care about, a match made in heaven that you shouldn't stand in the way of. If you do, the implicit suggestion might be that you're part of the problem and inadvertently responsible for those thousands of deaths. Or at least the government, who is keeping it illegal, is somehow implicated as well. There's also a sort of logic at the end. Lives should not be wasted, they should be saved. Remember, logos does not necessarily mean just a citation of facts and figures. It's when you show reasoning. And I think there is some reasoning here. If we allow people to sell organs, they can help save people's lives. If those people don't get to sell their organs, then some people will die. Makes sense. Obviously, we know it's more complicated than that. That's why McKay has to write a whole argument about it. So we also, aside from that reasoning, have more emotional language to make you sit up and pay attention. The words wasted versus saved. It's simple. Again, pathos does not have to be something over the top and tear-jerking. It's any kind of language choices, sentences, just sometimes important words that cause us to feel something or to identify with something. And so certainly we see McKay making those moves here. It's an important thing to do because for many of us, if we've even thought about organ sales before, it's likely only in terms of urban legends, occasionally true, about black market organ sales, right? Where somebody's kidney is stolen in some back alley and sold illegally. Now, that is not what McKay is arguing for, as we will find out. So we turn to page 158, and the Norton marks out another important ingredient of McKay's essay. She provides us background information about the issue and conducts research to convince us that this is a real problem and there's a real opportunity to solve it, which she is going to argue for. So first she tells us that about 350,000 Americans suffer from end-stage renal disease, a state of kidney disorder so advanced that the organ stops functioning altogether. So how are we helping those people? McKay has to inform us so that we can understand why there's a problem and why she has the way to fix it. So McKay goes on to inform us that the most common treatment is dialysis, which can be a painful process. She uses strong language here again to evoke sympathy. As someone myself whose grandfather spent years on dialysis, I was able to relate, remembering how terrible his kidney disease was and how reliant he was on his 3 times a week dialysis. Because my grandfather had other health problems, he was the lowest of the low on the kidney transplant list, as we'll get into in a moment. Dialysis was his only option, dialysis or death. McKay gives us factual information about the process of dialysis, logos, but she also makes the comparison that patients are, in a sense, shackled to a machine for the rest of their lives. This combination of information and stirring language is meant to get us to pay attention to an issue we might not have thought about much if it wasn't a part of our lives in some way. So there we have logos and pathos working together. Now the other solution aside from dialysis is a kidney transplant. But McKay informs her readers that this is more easily said than done. She provides us with some startling statistics invoking logos. In the year 2000 alone, 2,583 Americans died while waiting for a kidney transplant. Worldwide, the number of deaths is around 50,000. And then she cites her source. She then notes that it's illegal in most places to sell a kidney, and she hypothesizes that the number of people willing to part with one for free to donate is small. Therefore, most people in need of a transplant are placed on a deceased donors list. So they must essentially wait until enough people die who have elected to donate organs and hope that there will be enough healthy, viable kidneys to go around. Looking at the number of people who die while still on the list, clearly there is more demand than supply. As McKay notes, with over 60,000 people in line in the United States alone, the average wait is 10 long years. Now, I have one quibble here that I could bring up in a rhetorical analysis essay, challenging McKay's effective use of logos and ethos. There's no citation for this piece of information. Did she read this in another source that she cited elsewhere and forgot to here? If I wanted to, I could go read her other sources, maybe the Finkel source that was highlighted or cited just above, but I could also do some research on my own. But we have to judge her essay based on what she does. She potentially hurts her argument here because while this data shows how serious a problem the wait for a transplant is, I might begin to doubt the accuracy of her information due to the lack of citation. So that damages her ethos, aka her credibility, and her logos, because what could have been evidence is perhaps not as convincing to me anymore. Now, at the bottom of page 158, we get to the point of McKay's argument. She informs us that because of the lack of supply of kidneys, some people turn to the illegal market in which someone can buy, as she says, a fresh kidney from a healthy living donor for about $150,000. No lines, no waits, buyers, sellers, surgeons, nurses, all ready to perform this operation in another country where they can get away with it. But, of course, there are several problems here, aside from just the legality. How do you know which sellers to trust? Will the procedure be safe? Who can actually afford $150,000? Because obviously an illegal procedure is not covered by your insurance. So McKay goes on in the next pages to explain how the black market works, why it works, and why people are drawn to it. On page 159, the Norton textbook notes again the important ingredients here. The reasons that people will sell their kidneys: they need money, especially people in third world countries struck by poverty. And then McKay anticipates a counterargument from her reader. Such illegal practices are risky. And that's something that she needs to address if she's going to convince her reader that her proposal is what we need. So we now see her coming out to argue that if we regulated this process, it wouldn't be as risky anymore. If you allowed people to legally sell their organs, there would be more organs available because people would be interested in profiting, and then hospitals could make sure the procedures were safe because it would be legal and regulated by the government in some way. Now, she does admit that risks might still remain for both the sellers and the buyers. The seller, who perhaps is only giving up this kidney or other organ out of desperate poverty, might be making a decision that is not in their best interests. They could suffer health complications of their own with only one kidney. Now, McKay counters this potential objection with the idea that, as she said, studies have shown that a person can live a healthy life with only one kidney. Now, this is definitely true for some people. However, the problem here is, as I noted in an earlier example, McKay doesn't cite a source for this important piece of information. What studies? Do I have to look them up on my own? So right here, this is just as good as my own anecdotal evidence, which is not the most convincing. She should cite at least one study here. Now, a skeptical reader might begin to doubt her argument. There's certainly a logic to her proposal. There's mutual benefit from a legal arrangement of organ sales. And if it's already happening illegally, why not make it legal so less people get hurt and more people benefit? But McKay potentially harms this logic and her credibility when she doesn't support her points with citations. Therefore, we begin to doubt how much good evidence she has behind her argument. Her logos and her ethos are a little bit in danger here. And that's just in this spot, though. You might find other parts of her argument to be more effective. So the rest of McKay's piece is an example of a useful strategy for making a controversial argument. She introduces a counterargument, then seeks to defeat it through her combination of logos and pathos to convince her reader that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. In total, she covers 4 counterarguments that she knows people will raise to her legal organ selling proposal. And then she works to prove through her reasoning that she's still right. Now, it's up to you to judge how well she does so. She does strengthen her credibility or ethos by even just giving space to counterarguments and addressing them. She doesn't just ignore the opposition. It's a good move as a writer to recognize people who might disagree with you and their reasons and then try to convince them. This shows that she's thought about her issue and has done a fair amount of research, even if I have noted some examples of when she doesn't always cite her sources. She does have a fair amount of citations throughout. So ethos is the trust that a writer establishes with the reader. Because she's not an expert in the field, she is a student writer, she has to establish her ethos through moves like citing credible sources and being fair enough to give space to common counterarguments, which she does. Now, you must decide how effective is her reasoning. Rhetorical analysis is not just a matter of checking off boxes and saying, she cites her sources, good, she gives some evidence, good, she uses emotional appeals, good, right? Instead, you have to look at those ingredients and decide, does her logic make sense? Do her language choices help to set up the right emotional tone to convince readers of her argument? It likely won't be all bad or all good. You should take note of the parts of an argument that you think are effective and the parts that don't work as well. I've pointed out some good, I've pointed out some bad, and I've left a lot of other things for you to look at in your homework, and if you decided that for your rhetorical analysis essay, you wanted to analyze this one. So study this essay closely. When analyzing logos, take a look at all of the places where she sets up a counter-argument, and the book points this out for you really nicely, and then look at her response, right? How does she respond to the objections to her proposals? Does her reasoning make sense? Does she explain herself convincingly? Even if you disagree with her idea about organ sales, you need to judge, does she provide logical reasons for thinking that organ sales would help people? Does she leave out any considerations that you think are important to add to this conversation? To judge her pathos, look clearly at the language and the places where she tries to reach out to her readers as humans, calling upon their empathy, their values. Where does she try to make us feel sympathy for people in need of organs or in need of money? Where does she use particular word choices or questions to get us to care? Is there a good balance of pathos and logos? An academic argument can use pathos wisely, but there should always be more logos, more reasoning and evidence than pathos. If an academic argument has more emotion than reasoning, then it's really not very academic. You need a healthy balance of all of the rhetorical appeals, but logos should usually reign supreme. So if you, let's say, decided to write your rhetorical analysis essay about McKay's paper, it would have an introduction where you would indicate what McKay's argument is, that governments should allow sales of organs so that people can make money and get life-saving transplants. You would then indicate that you're analyzing how effective her argument is. And then your body paragraphs would talk about specific examples of logos, pathos, and ethos, and how you think McKay does with those strategies. You wouldn't be able to cover everything from the article. You would look at just a few specific examples that you have analyzed. So you could also organize your paper in different ways. You can even focus on some things aside from logos, pathos, and ethos if you wanted to.